Shalom. My name is Hannah, and I'm living in Israel right now. And originally from Canada. I was born and raised in an Orthodox Jewish home in the prairies of Canada. And I went to a little private Hebrew school and grew up in a very sheltered kind of environment. And until I reached my teens and I went into a public school. And I was suddenly introduced to the wide world of just public life, and there was lots of parties and alcohol and boys and all this kind of thing, and I was totally flung into it and didn't have a foundation at all for how to deal with it. And I started to get in with a bad crowd, and I started to do things that I shouldn't have been doing, and had quite a turmoil in my teenage years. But eventually I left home at 17 to study in another province. I was on my own, and although I learned the Old Testament Bible stories, I didn't really, I knew about God, but that's about it. He was somewhere there, and that's it. And I eventually married at about 18 years old to someone who was Catholic and divorced and an alcoholic. And my parents didn't come to the wedding. They were very upset that I was marrying outside my faith. My faith was very important to them. And after a short period of time, I started to become ill. And I went for a number of tests, and the doctors eventually found there was problems with my kidney function, and they decided they were going to have to do an operation, a surgery to remove my kidney. And then they found that I was pregnant at the same time. And their advice was just to do a D&C, and then they would do the surgery. And it wasn't even anything that I really thought about. It was just, well, this is what the doctors say. You know, the doctors say I need this surgery for my kidney, and then they say they need to do a D&C first, that it wouldn't be good to continue with the pregnancy because of this medical condition. And so I just accepted that. And I was put into the hospital. This time, that was about 20 years ago. So at that time I was put into the hospital in a maternity ward. It was not very sensitive. And it was a very, very traumatic experience for me. I had never been in a hospital before in my life. And all of a sudden I was just put into this maternity ward and stripped and shaved, and I had to be in there for a few days. And I just felt almost as if it was a forced thing, almost like a rape. I felt very defiled, and I remember the doctor yelling at me on the table because I was so upset about what was happening, and he just yelled at me. In fact, the night before, I remember pacing up and down in the hospital corridor, and I think something inside of me knew that what was going to happen was not going to be good for me. And so I was pacing up and down, I was crying, and the doctor yelled at me and said, well, you know, if you don't want to do this, then just go home or something. But I felt like, well, this is what the doctors have said I need to do, and then I need to have the surgery, so I must do it. And when I went home, I just thought, okay, well, I'll just go on with my life. But it was never the same again. I seemed to just lose my will to live. And I would just sit in the apartment and unplug the phone. I didn't want to answer the door. I didn't want to talk to anybody. And I just became more and more depressed. And I would ask my husband, well, at night we would go to sleep, and I'd turn to him and I'd start to cry, and I'd say, can you give me any reason why I should want to wake up tomorrow morning? Life just seemed so meaningless, and I didn't even relate it to the abortion. I just knew something had happened, something was wrong. My only experience that I had had before that with abortion was that when I was young, in my teen years, I remember going to visit my cousin in the hospital, and I knew she had had an abortion. She was 15, and it was the first time that she had been intimate with anyone, and she became pregnant. And I remember her telling me that the whole time she kept saying to herself, it's all right, if I get pregnant, I can just have an abortion. I'll just have an abortion if I get pregnant, so this is okay. And so she went ahead and she was pregnant, and she had the abortion. When I went to visit her in the hospital, I remember her getting out of the bed, and the whole bed was full of blood, and it just shocked me. And later, a few years later, she did marry in her 20s, and the sad thing was that she had an ectopic pregnancies, and they had to remove her tubes, and she could never have children. And this was so sad for me, because this was a girl that all her life, all she wanted to do was have lots of kids. All the time we grew up together, like we were very close, we grew up together, and she was always saying, I'm going to have 10 kids and raise a big family, and they lived out in a big farmhouse, and that's all she ever wanted in her life. And then because of this one incident, and because of this one choice that she made, she could never have any children. She adopted one child, and they divorced, and that was it. So it just was very sad. But I didn't even relate this to my own abortion, because I think I thought of it as, well, this is just a D&C. We didn't even call it an abortion. But because of this depression and all of this, eventually, after 7 years, it led to the breakdown of my marriage. And I went searching for answers. I went searching for relief from the pain that I felt every day of my life. And I looked to the occult, to New Age, because the New Age promised that we could just, accept ourselves. We used to sing something like, I'm just perfect just the way I am, and there's to be God without any guilt. And so I wasn't facing anything that I had done. I was just trying to go on, and I couldn't. And I had this huge void in my life. I had this great need to be loved, which, as we all do. And so very shortly after my divorce, I became involved in a relationship, and I got pregnant again. And at that time I was friends with a woman that was a very kind of strong feminist, and I at that time I kind of had my doubts, well, should I really have an abortion? But it was almost like there was no question about it. Well, of course, if this isn't something that you had planned for, I had 2 children already, I was a single mother. How was I going to have another child? Plus, the thing is, you don't want anybody to know about it. I just recently divorced and separated. I didn't want my parents to know. I didn't want anybody to know. It just seemed much easier to just go in and have an abortion. It's all paid for by the medical system, and so why not? And my friend encouraged me in this too. Why would you even think about it? I mean, it's not even a baby, it's just this tissue, this fetus, and you just, look, you take care of it, in 10 minutes it's over, and you go on with your life. And that sounded very reasonable to me. So I booked it, I went in, I was under a general anesthetic, so I didn't feel anything. I woke up and I thought, all right, I'll go on with my life. But I hated my boyfriend, I hated myself, I never dealt with what was going on. And I was waitressing at that time. I was raising my kids as a single mother, and I was waitressing nights. I was getting into a lot of car accidents because I was so tired from looking after my kids all day and waitressing all night. And right after the abortion, I had to go back to work and waitress. So I went in to start serving tables again. I went into the bathroom, and just gushes and gushes of blood were coming out. So I thought I better call the hospital and go back. So I called them. They said, come back in. And I lay there and just bleeding and bleeding, and they said, oh, it was an incomplete abortion. They hadn't gotten it all out. That was causing the hemorrhage. So they had to put me under a general anesthetic again. And I had to go through this again. And meanwhile, there was nobody to look after my children. I got a babysitter to look after, and she was complaining that she had to stay with my kids. And I just felt so lost. I felt so alone. I felt so ashamed of myself. I didn't want anybody to know. And after this, I started to feel like I could never be real with other people, because I felt like if they really knew me, they would not love me, or they would not even be able to have a friendship with me if they really knew what I had done. And even at this time, I really didn't have an awareness that I had killed a child or anything like that, but I just knew inside something was terribly wrong. And still, there was this compulsion to become pregnant again. And I didn't know where that was coming from. But I couldn't seem to stop it. I was compelled to get pregnant again, even though that led to the same destruction. And also, I so much just wanted to be loved and for somebody to just hold me. I don't remember my father ever holding me. I don't remember him ever saying that he loved me, or ever affirming me, or encouraging me. And I just so needed that. And I got into another relationship. I was in university at the time. I was trying to do something with my life, and on the outside I looked great. I was getting top marks in my class. I always had a boyfriend. There was big social life, and cute kids. Everything seemed great. But inside, I was really, really dying. And this time when I got pregnant, it seemed like it was not so easy in Canada to have an abortion anymore. And so we rented a car and we drove down to the States. And we had to drive through this snowstorm for a long time. And I kept feeling, maybe this snowstorm is a sign from God that I am to turn back. But I was so desperate, and it was so, how can I stop my university? I just can't do this. You just do the same thing. And so we went to, and we stayed in this awful motel room the night before, and I just cried and cried all night. I didn't want to do it. And I just stayed in this little closet crying all night. I didn't want to have another abortion. But I didn't think that there was any other choice. I remember my boyfriend banging his head against the wall, just banging his head against the wall. Oh, we didn't know what else we could do. Next day, went and I had the abortion. This time, it was much more traumatic because it was done under just a local anesthetic, and for the first time I was awake, and I felt the pain, and I knew what was happening. I remember that as I lay on the table before they did the procedure, the abortion, my boyfriend was with me. He was a Catholic, and as I lay there, he made the sign of the cross on my forehead. And I'm not Catholic. I didn't believe in Jesus. Jesus is for the Gentiles, for goodness sake, not for us Jews.